morning again. Another great presentation that we have coming up from Emerson Wells, talking about mental hygiene.
Hi everyone, so as Ann said, I'm Emerson Wells, and my cause is specifically youth mental hygiene and encouraging lifelong self-care. So just what I'm going to do today, I'm going to start out with my my particular story, how I got interested in the cause, then I'm going to go into some quick definitions that I think you all need to know, then some specific topic background, both generally and in where I'm from, the theory behind my project, what I'm actually going to do, and then where I see it going. So to start out, I grew up in upstate New York with an older sister and a younger brother. That's me and my sister. I was Winnie the Pooh. She was a princess. And my brother, I think, was a pumpkin because he was born like 2 months before, so he's not in the picture. And that's us about 2 years ago, which I think is one of the last photos of us taken together that we all look good in. So I threw that one in there. And when I was a kid, my sister was my best friend. But more than that, she was the person that I looked to be my leader. She used to have me do her chores for her so that I would get to play whatever game she invented that day. She was such a creative, inventive, and bright person, and I was definitely, she was the alpha, I was the beta. It was all about her, and I was totally okay with that. As we got older, a lot of things started to change, and we grew more busy, but we also started going apart. And as we started going, she wasn't just going apart from me, though. She was going apart from a lot of things. She was growing apart from her peers in school. She was growing apart from her own happiness and well-being. And she was growing into things like, self-abuse, self-medication through drugs and alcohol, and, depression issues, suicidal thoughts, a lot of really scary things. And, she was going to therapists. She was diagnosed with a host of different mental illnesses. But it wasn't really, necessarily enough, and it's still something she struggles with today. And, growing up with that, we went from people that are really close to, I really care about her, but I think it's really tough for me to, still make that connection, and we're not necessarily as close as we'd like today. And although she still does live at home. So I went off to school when I was, 2 years ago, and went to Brown University, and was finally kind of away from my sister, and, was away from that, I guess, in a lot of ways, dark cloud over my life, although, it's tough to call someone that you love so much, something like that. But, so I got to school and I started studying neuroscience and public health, and in both of those topics, mental health is still a huge part of my life. So, in neuroscience, we're not just learning about how the brain works, but we're learning about ways that it doesn't work. We're talking about how drugs work, which, guess what, they still don't actually know how they work, but somehow they do, and they're, trying to treat mental illnesses. And in public health, mental health is getting a lot of attention now for being a really important part of health and of quality of life in general. And I also am starting my first semester in school. I started teaching through BEAM, Brown Elementary After School Mentoring, at a local school in Providence called William DeBate Elementary, which is a tremendous school with a lot of community buy-in, but that's also suffering from a host of issues. It's about 90% free and reduced lunch. It's many minority students whose parents don't have a high education or might not even be able to speak English. But when I was at the school, I noticed a lot of really amazing things, but I also noticed, again, mental health wasn't really being addressed. And you can see issues where kids from a very young age aren't learning to trust or deal with their emotions in a healthy way. So that leads me into some definitions that I want to quickly share before I move forward. So the first is just mental health in general. And all it really is just a state of well-being where you are able to complete the tasks you need to do to have a successful life. Mental illness stems from that, and it's basically when your mental health isn't good enough to lead your healthy life the way you need it to. And mental hygiene is something that a lot of people don't know about, and it's kind of the focus on my project. It's very preventative, and it's just routine emotional self-care that helps make sure that issues in mental health, that imbalances, don't become a further, manifest themselves in future mental illness that really is disruptive to your life. So luckily, there has been a lot more focus and attention on mental health recently through the CDC, through the WHO, the World Health Organization, and other public health entities. So we're learning a lot more about, the actual issues of mental health. So when you look at disability worldwide and, the things that are really causing people to not be able to contribute as well as they could to their lives and to their society, 5 of the 10 of those causes are psychiatric conditions. So these aren't just things that, people are feeling a little down about themselves. These are things that are causing people to not be able to fully function in their normal life. And this starts early. 20% of teens suffer from developmental, emotional, or behavioral problems, and this is actually a much greater, this actually has a much greater impact too in low-income communities when there are a lot of extra, emotional and environmental stresses that are added on to students from these communities. And those stresses and abuses actually cause genetic changes that lead to further mental and physical issues down the line. So this isn't just something that, manifests outward. I know that for a lot of people, it might not just be enough to say, oh, it causes mental issues, but it actually does lead to physical things, things that can be very clearly measured as well. And I have seen, so although this data exists, especially in Rhode Island where Brown is located, I've seen very specific issues. So in 2012, Rhode Island released a strategic plan. The Rhode Island Health Department released a strategic plan that talked about, where they want to go, what they want to do. You all know strategic plans. And the phrase mental health showed up exactly once in the entire thing, and it was not actually at all in a priority or a goal. It was just, there was kind of a list of things they measure, like birth, death, marriage, divorce, and they measure the suicide rate. There was nothing more than that. They didn't talk about things they're doing to address it, to improve it. It was just that they measure it. Secondly, if you go, the health website has a great section on resources for schools, tips about nutrition and hygiene and all those sort of things. There's nothing that at all begins to address any sort of mental health issues in schools. So I've also seen this awareness gap firsthand in the school I work. And I spend a lot of time at the school, and a lot of it's really fun. I actually this year was Santa Claus at their Christmas dance. So, there was dancing going on, but I donned the costume and sat in the chair, and kids came up and took their pictures with me for, to celebrate Christmas. We do stuff where, the kids actually come to Brown, and we do a big Halloween thing. So, as you can see, we did a little mummy wrapping, and those were two of the kids that I worked with there. But you also see some stuff, when you're working, when you're there every week or multiple times a week that aren't so fun. One of them, a particularly poignant example relates really closely to my idea of mental hygiene and why mental health is so important. So this April, I think it was late April of this year, I was doing my normal thing. I'm in charge of a couple classrooms, so I kind of basically do laps around the school for an afternoon and make sure that everyone has the supplies they need, that kids are paying attention, and the activities are going well, and I'm talking with administrators. So I'm walking down the hall, and one of my teachers came up to me, and luckily we have multiple teachers in every room, so the class was still being managed and everything, but she came and was just visibly shaken. So I asked her what was wrong, how I could help, and she told me that one of her students, a second grader, this is a K-2 class that does arts, had urinated on the floor. In the middle of class, just, there was some sort of, she doesn't really know what happened, but basically she just turned around and he was urinating on the floor. And she was obviously shaken by this. This situation quickly came under control. We have parents, as I said, we have really good community buy-in, so we had parents that were there that were able to, quickly address the situation, get the kid new clothes, make the class was calmed down, they were on to the next activity. But she was really scared, so I went and talked to, my administrator that I work really closely with, and she had just found out, an hour or so into the program that child had recently become homeless, and that he had been dealing, and that it had happened earlier this week, and that he'd been in and out of the principal's office all week, and that normally they wouldn't send him to the after-school program because they knew that he'd been causing trouble all day, but that they knew that this was an issue. They knew that this had just happened, and therefore didn't want to send him home, which in this case didn't exist. But it brings up a couple, I think, really scary things about the way mental health and mental hygiene are treated in schools. First of all, he was in the principal's office all week. And although, the principal is a great guy who knows the students, and I don't think he was in there yelling at them or punching him, to be sent to the principal's office as a student, you know what that means from a very young age, and that cannot have felt good. So he was in a really emotionally poor place, and being sent to a place that honestly just kind of showed him he was being bad, he was wrong. Also, there was a lack of resources and next steps. He hadn't really received any sort of counseling or advice beyond just what the teachers felt equipped to give. And we, as the after-school program, were not informed of this issue, which was a pretty, concrete mental issue, like we would have any other physical ailment. I'm sure I and my teachers would have been notified right away if he'd, hurt his leg that day or something, but that was just something that wasn't really deemed important to share with us. So my project basically revolves around this. A healthy outside starts from the inside, and that's really what I'm seeking to address. So I'm just going to read this to you, unfortunately. Sorry, guys. But I wordsmithed it, so hopefully it's pretty good. So for my vision, I envision a society in which all children have the emotional foundation to build happy, healthy, and successful adult lives. Paramount to this effort is the acceptance and maintenance of mental health as a valued part of one's overall well-being. And therefore, my mission is to teach those who work closely with youth to incorporate the values and best practices of mental hygiene and illness prevention throughout their work. So I really want to be working, there's already a lot of partners in the schools. I'm part of an organization that partners with the schools, that works closely with the kids. They have teachers that are really, very involved in their upbringing. So I want to give those teachers, those students that are working with them, the tools to, on a daily basis, to really address this like they would maybe physical hygiene. So what I will do specifically is I'll start out and do some student training. So as a leader in the community service center in my school, I can, and I'm already talking to the faculty of this, of our public service center, and I'll start to run trainings for the students that go, that work in these communities to talk about, to basically bring up the issue and discuss, how they can really address it. I'm also going to create shareable materials that I'll first give just to that school that I work with specifically to make sure that they have the information, and then hopefully through advocacy efforts, I will work with the health department through Rhode Island to get mental health to be, next time they do a strategic plan, I think it should be a priority. And I think there should be a section about it on the school website. And I think, hopefully if I have these shareable materials that I've disseminated, that I will get feedback on those and hopefully hear, this was helpful, that I can, partner with the Rhode Island Health Department, and they will help me disseminate that information even further. So just to give some examples of the kind of things that I'll talk about in my presentation, in my materials, of best practices. So the first, one thing I know that I had a classroom do while I was a teacher is just start each day with a check-in. So this was a class that was doing dance with 3rd to 5th graders, and just some really amazing teachers, but one of the things they started to do was a check-in every day. So the kids would come in and they'd go around in a circle and just say, from a scale of 1 to 10, how they felt that day. And although there wasn't necessarily a lot of nuance in the answers, I heard a lot of 10s and I heard a lot of 1s, it let the other kids know how they were feeling. And you could tell that if a kid said he was a 1 that day, the other kids paid attention and knew that, and knew to maybe reach out to make sure that everything was going well, that kid felt comfortable and accepted. Another thing that's really important is if you're chastising a kid, if you're getting them in trouble, you need to let them know what it's about. Because, it needs to be very clear that they're not the problem, that it was a specific action that they did that they shouldn't do in the future, and here's why. And that one, the kid will listen better if they really understand the reason they're being chastised. They don't just feel like they did something wrong or they were bad themselves, but also just puts them in a much better state. There's also just the issue, as I brought up earlier, of care versus punishment, and just making sure that when a kid is going through an issue that might make them act out, that a lot of times they need care, they don't need punishment, which is obviously something that we talk a lot about in the prison system as well. But, it starts early, especially for minority youth, where, African-American children are much more likely to be suspended, to be sent to the principal's office, that sort of thing. And also just addressing the root causes of issues. It's not that the kid is acting out, it's that he's homeless. And that's, I think, is a much bigger deal. So for my timeline, it's a little thrown off because I'll be abroad in the fall, so with very limited internet access. So although I'll be thinking about the issues, I won't be working on them. But this summer, I actually will be at Brown a week from today, and I'm going to start meeting with some of my partners. And I also want to finalize, my presentation and the materials that I will hopefully be disseminating. In this spring, I would like to actually start giving the presentations and giving out the materials. And the next school year from there, I would like to really start my advocacy efforts once I have, those trainings, those things under my belt to show, look, this is what we've done, this is why it's important, this is why you need to include it, I have this feedback. So there are some kind of inherent challenges to this project. The first is privacy. When you're dealing with a health issue, especially things like mental health, privacy can be an issue, but I think the way that I'm overcoming that is by not really making it about necessarily a specific diagnosable issue. It's more just kind of a general prevention mentality throughout my project, and just giving the people that are already working with them, that already have this inside information, the tools to address it. Also, lack of influence. I'm a 20-year-old kid who's still only 2 years into my career, but I think luckily I have really good institutional support. If I'm running a training through our public service center, that means something. Kids show up to that training because it's a co-curricular thing. And also going to a notable research university in a tiny, tiny state is really helpful because people from Brown know people in the health department and can make a really easy connection for me that I can just quickly bridge that gap. For lack of credibility, that's obviously something that I can also have an issue with. I don't have a degree. I haven't done firsthand. I've I guess, qualitative things, but I have no specific research. But I will be, making sure that the information I give out is very specifically sourced and cited, and it's not just going to be me talking. It's going to be me translating and getting the information of the specialist out there. And lastly, measurement of outcomes is always something that can be kind of tough, but I know that we have a lot of public health researchers at Brown that are used to measuring outcomes of stuff that's just as complex as this or more complex. So I, with, again, that sort of institutional support, I'm not really worried about it. And that's the reason why I think I want to overcome these outcomes. That was me my first semester of freshman year with the second grade class that I taught science to, who's a really great group of kids, and I've seen grow even more since then. So my outputs, the concrete things that I'd like to produce are, I'd like to start running my trainings and get the material out there to the specific elementary school, and then in the long term, I want to working with the Rhode Island Health Department, disseminate that information further to schools around the state. And I would also really like to ensure the inclusion of mental health in the future strategic plans of the Rhode Island Health Department, make sure that it is a priority for the state. And for my outcomes, the actual, maybe less concrete change I'd like to make. So I want those who attend trainings and receive materials to feel much more comfortable when issues of mental health come up in their work, and also to be able to feel like they can teach good mental hygiene to the students with whom they work. And I also want to increase acceptance of mental health and reduce the stigma of mental health among the people that attend the trainings, but also hopefully by their influence, the students with whom they work every day. And for my long-term goals, and I guess that starts out at the elementary school that I work at, but long-term I'd like that generalized acceptance to be an even great, to disseminate throughout Rhode Island. And I guess the country, but right now I'm just looking at Rhode Island. And just in general, foster a culture in which mental health issues are treated with the same regard as physical ailments. So that is the end of my presentation. So now there's time for questions if anyone has anything. Yeah? Yeah. Vaguely, but I'm so involved in the research on that. Yeah. No, definitely. No, thank you. And yeah, I think definitely looking to other states is a really good idea and kind of seeing what other stuff's out there. The problem is that a lot of the stuff is very internal. So, you look up what people are doing and it's not necessarily clear, but hopefully by, working with, I know last year I was working with the New York State Health Department and I got access to stuff on vaccinations because that was my job. So I could just email another state department and say hey, can you give me what you're doing? So I think, to really be able to do as much as I'd like on that department, I think I need to get directly involved in the, in the health department of Rhode Island. But luckily, as I said, I already know the people that I can jump through to get there. So that's something that I'll definitely start doing more. Yeah.
So just a question about your scope. Are the work you're planning on doing, is it focused on teachers and whatnot in the schools, or are you actually focusing on the students themselves?
So I think that I can have a much greater impact by kind of creating a group of people that, by I guess working with a small group of people that has access to a much larger group. So I think, by giving the information to the teachers, to the administrators, and to the, the Brown students that are already working with these communities, if I teach 15, let's say I give information to 15 teachers, those 15 teachers, each have classrooms of 25 students, and they'll get that out there. And I also think that when you're dealing with things like mental health and mental hygiene that are kind of complex, it's doing an educational seminar for kindergartners isn't really going to do anything, but going to the kindergarten teachers and saying, this is how you should treat these emotional issues, this is what you should be aware of, then they can just implement that on a daily basis. That could hopefully lead to just greater cultural change in the students they work with without necessarily making it explicit. Yeah.
I could see an initial pushback.
Yeah.
By saying that so many
Yeah.
So that will be one of the first pushbacks you're going to get.
Yeah.
So what are some ideas that you're generating to address that?
Well, I think the thing about my project is that it's not just relevant for one student, they're trouble students. I think that it's important for, and I want to get the point across that it's important for every student, and that's why it's very preventative and very generalized, because I think like you can't push off the emotional issues of every single one of your students, because they all are going through their own things, and their emotional and mental health and well-being is an important thing for every student. And the good thing about it too is that it's pretty simple stuff. You don't really have to go out of your way to do it. You just need to be thinking about it. And for a lot of things, awareness isn't necessarily enough. And I know, like for water, let's say, like you tell them there's bad water, what's the next step? And luckily you address that. But for mental hygiene and mental health issues, or I guess mental hygiene more specifically, because mental health, there's obviously next steps that need to be taken if you're mentally ill. But when you're thinking about mental hygiene, a lot of it is just awareness of just realizing like these emotions are important, and we need to make sure that we're addressing them in the way that we probably at the end of the day know is right, but we don't necessarily give enough credence to as like a super vital thing. Yeah.
What are the other institutions, nonprofits, or otherwise that share that goal of yours to increase awareness on mental health?
I mean, I think there are a lot of them out there, but I think the problem is that a lot of the campaigns that I see are more focused on like high school, college age students, and getting the information out there to, I guess, to people that are older and are maybe dealing with like the more concrete issues. So I think by getting the information out there earlier in a less formalized way, I think can do just as much good. And I know like specifically there's like a lot of organizations, let's say on Brown's campus, that I see doing work, and like clubs that I know people in and have worked with a bit, but like all they're doing is sort of work on our campus or advocacy stuff that involves college age students. So I'm really looking to do something that works directly with the schools to address it from a younger age. Yeah.
You said in your research you addressed the issues of mental illness. So say you're dealing with a case study of individuals who come from a privileged background.
Yeah.
And you know that a large amount of mental illness is coming from the household or systemic issues.
Yeah.
How can specific policy changes target those individuals when the school only interacts with them a certain amount of hours a day?
Yeah, so I think obviously like there's always going to be more things that you can do. There's always going to be more things that you would change. And I know like Janessa, you said like you were concerned about that as well. Like there's a lot of other issues. Books can only do so much. I think that's the same thing. At the end of the day, I can't enact housing policies and change the education system. But I think at least, in the community I work, the school is a huge part of the community. And there's the school, there's the after school program, there's summer programs. So it does, from what I've seen in a lot of places, the school really can matter. And I think at the end of the day, outside of their home, which I think is like a whole nother ballgame of things to address, the school is the place that they're spending the most time. So I still think it's a really good place to address these, at least start to address some of these issues. And obviously, you're never going to be able to do enough. You're never going to be able to change everything. But I also think that, creating mentally healthy individuals and resilient individuals will, help overcome a lot of those issues as well. Yeah, Garrett?
One question for you. What's your favorite mental health hygiene activity, and what type of mental health hygiene activities do you plan to share with your target?
So I think my favorite is just talking to people, and I mean, you guys definitely know that. Like I've talked to you a lot, but just like, I mean, I think for me, like that's my personal preference. I just want to talk about it, and like if I'm feeling sad or angry or annoyed or whatever, like I just talk to someone about it, and I'm focused really hard on just not bottling things up and acknowledging and addressing and confronting certain issues. And for the ones that I was going to bring up, I mean, I talked a little bit about some of them, but things like the daily check-in, things like making sure that when you are, that when you're talking to a kid about an issue that they're having in the classroom, make sure that you're telling them why the issue is bad, not why the kid is bad. Other things like, toxic masculinity is a really big issue, and, teaching boys, especially from a young age, that, like, their emotions are something that's okay, and, especially for boys, like, don't bottle them up, like, you can talk about them. That's something that's important to do as well. Yeah.
So for the program with the pictures that you've shown,
Yeah.
that's been in place at Brown University for some time now, or is it something that
Yeah, so that's actually a very sustained program. I came in And so my boss actually has been in that school for almost 20 years. Being the program that we created just kind of combined a bunch of existing programs and really made it into a more sustainable, long-term, structured program. So that was incorporated, I think, the year before I was a freshman, and then my freshman year I was a teacher, and then this past year I was in a more administrative role. But it's been around for a while, and we have a lot of volunteers, we have a lot of campus buy-in, so I see it being around for a long time to come. Well, do you have another question? Oh, okay.
Your actions are bigger than your words and what you've shown, and you can make a big difference.
Well, thank you so much.
In the program and working with them, even though it's been established,
Mm-hmm.
but you are doing those things, and really cool.
Well, thank you so much. So it looks like that is it. So I will not hold you from your lunch any longer. Thanks so much, guys. And if you have any further questions, you can obviously talk to me or reach me at my email, which is just my name with an underscore in between at brown.edu. Thanks, guys.